New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hello, my friends, and thank you for joining us today for Spiritual Toolkit. My name is Brock Ford, and I am your host, and joining me on the team is producer Peter Millar and our New Thought Media Network founder, Robert Brzezinski. The idea for this show came from my sincere desire to be of support and a voice for the disenfranchised, the struggling, and hurting people within my reach, to offer spiritual and ethical practices that helps others transform their lives, relationships, and careers. And it's my hope that we can support others on their path to their passion, their dreams, and their best life, building a bridge of understanding, healing, and thriving for all. So we will have guests from all walks of life talking about real life and navigating its twists and turns and living triumphantly. So today, my guest is Mr. TJ Woodward, an inspirational speaker and educator who enlightens and entertains the audiences around the world. Utilizing his captivating and authentic style, he assists people in changing the way they exist through his informative and dynamic talks and training. He's the author of 3 best-selling books: Conscious Being, Awakening to Your True Nature; Conscious Recovery, A Fresh Perspective on Addiction; and Conscious Creation, 5 Steps to Embracing the Life of Your Dreams. As an addiction treatment specialist, TJ assists treatment programs in achieving brilliant results through his program development, curriculum designing, and clinical training. And in 2018, he was given the honor of being selected as a thought leader on wholehearted.org. And y'all, that's a prestigious award. And in 2017, TJ launched the Conscious Recovery Method, which is a groundbreaking and effective approach to viewing and treating addiction. TJ is a graduate of the Spiritual Development Program and the Leadership Development Program at Unity Institute. And y'all, he was the founding minister of Agape Bay Area in Oakland, ordained by Michael Bernard Beckwith. TJ also hosted the Conscious Being radio show on Unity Online Radio and the Awakened Living TV show in San Francisco. That's a lot of accomplishments, y'all. So with that said, let's welcome my dear longtime friend, Mr. TJ Woodward, to Spiritual Toolkit.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. And I love that I'm able to say, good to see you, Reverend Dr. Brock Ford. What a treat. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. A lot's happened since we actually last saw each other. I actually don't think we've seen each other in like 10 years in person.
I think that's right.
So at any rate, so let's not go that long again, but thank you for joining us. I know it's going to be a wonderful conversation today. Everybody is going to get so much from it. So thank you very much for being here.
I'm so honored. Thank you.
So if you don't mind, let's go way back and let's start with your growing up. You know, I believe you grew up in Indiana, Dallas, and you can tell us wherever else. But tell us about growing up and what your family life was like.
Well, I'm happy that you asked the question, and you know me, I like to dive in and go deep. And so I'm going to tell you really some things about my childhood that have not only informed my own spiritual journey, but also have made me uniquely available, I would say, to assist others now. And when I think about my early years, the first thing that comes to mind is how filled with happiness, joy, awe, and wonder that I was for the first 5 years or so. And I literally remember those hot summer days in Indiana, mesmerized by a blade of grass and a butterfly and just feeling like the luckiest person alive. And I grew up in a society, like I would say most of us do. I'll say it this way. Every year, my mother on our birthday took us for our portraits. And every year, I think it was like Olin Mills or Sears, and some of us are old enough to know what that means. We would have our portrait taken on our birthday. And she often tells me by the time I was 4 years old, she realized I was probably going to be gay. And I show her that 3-year picture on my 3rd year birthday. And I say, Mom, what took you so long? And the reason I start with that is because I was this effervescent little gay boy in Indiana in the late 1960s. And really, the world wasn't quite ready for that, or at least a large portion of the world. I felt very loved and accepted in my home. But when I went out into the world, it definitely wasn't okay to be this boy who talked like a girl, walked like a girl, and threw like a girl. There are so many layers to that conversation. But by the time I was 7 years old, I had a profound experience of closing my heart. And I decided some really huge things about myself and about the world that I understand now became kind of like my core operating system. I am not lovable. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. And that became my operating system for many, many years until I got into recovery and discovered New Thought. So that's the short version.
That's good. How did you find New Thought in recovery? Go ahead.
It's interesting because I got sober in 1986. So I got sober when I was almost 21. You know, that experience of closing my heart caused many years of a lot of pain, a lot of dissociation, honestly, and disconnection from my true nature. And so when I discovered weed and alcohol around 13 or 14, it brought so much relief. It's funny, I was thinking back, I started drinking and using at my church. That was the first place I discovered it. So there's a story, but
I was gonna ask you, did you grow up in church? So save that story and don't forget, say that next. I
absolutely won't forget it. There are some funny stories, and it's very timely, actually. But I got sober just before I turned 21, and a friend of mine had the Daily Word, and I was reading the Daily Word every time I went to his house, and I didn't know it was connected to a community. And I think it was 88 or 89. I'm not always clear on the year, but I walked into my first Unity in Dallas. It was a small little Unity. I felt like I had arrived home for the first time, and everything I was reading in Daily Word just rang true for me. So when I found that community, it was as if I had come home.
Speaking of Dallas and Unity, did you go to the one on Greenville or the one on Forest Avenue?
I went to the one on Greenville. See, you know these. So the one on Greenville was a smaller community, very, very sweet. I don't even remember their name, but it was a married couple who were the ministers, and then their daughter was the musician, and it was just such a beautiful experience.
I moved to Dallas in December 16th, 1996, I believe it was. No, that's when I moved to San Francisco. I moved to Dallas in 1987. Wow. And it was 1987. And because I knew Unity and grew up in Unity, I looked for the Unity Church, and I went to the one on Greenville. So I don't know if you were there then or not, but it was a husband and wife, older husband and wife minister team.
Oh my goodness, we were there together because I moved to Dallas. Well, I got sober in 86. I moved to Dallas in 83, and I moved to San Francisco in 91. So in 88, 89, and 90, I absolutely, during those years, certainly 90 and 91, I was at that little Unity on Greenville, and I just loved it. I had a small group of friends, and we went to Unity every Sunday, and then we would go to the San Francisco Rose on Greenville for brunch and talk about what we learned. And it was also new for us, and it was just a time of great enthusiasm.
Well, how amazing our lives pass.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And speaking of Unity, what church did you grow up in? You said you did grow up in church. What type of church was that, and what was that experience like?
I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I grew up singing in a very traditional men and boys choir, like a very English style. And it's kind of funny that we're talking about this today because I'm going to London tomorrow for the first time since I was there singing, when I sang at St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, Canterbury Cathedral. So I'm going to go visit all those places this weekend. And it's really What I loved about growing up in that church is I wasn't really picking up on anything that was being said, but I remember the felt sense, the energy. I was very much about the music and about the experience. And if you know anything about the Episcopal Church or the Church of England, I call it guilt-free Catholicism. I know it's probably not really fair to say that, but I didn't grow up with this idea of a punishing God. What I did grow up with is a sense of comfort when I was at church. So it's always been kind of a place that feels safe and comfortable for me. And I know that's not everyone's story, which is sad to me, but it certainly was my story.
You know, I think, you know, I grew up in a Southern Baptist family. My grandpa was a preacher, but at any rate, but I remember I was dating an older guy in Memphis before I left. And he was an Episcopalian. And so we went to St. Mary's Cathedral in Memphis, and I would go with him occasionally. I loved all the pomp and circumstance and whatever you call it, and the incense and all those things. I loved going there. I felt so at peace in the cathedral. Yeah, I loved it. But it wasn't anything like my Unity teachings that transformed my life.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, when I think about it now, I think just like you, I loved the pomp and circumstance, and I grew up singing in the choir in the cathedral in Indiana. And it was just this beautiful thing. My dad had been in the choir since he was a kid. And so there was this long tradition, and tradition is such a great word, you know, to attach to that religion. And I certainly wasn't getting the message that I heard when I walked into my first Unity that really rang true with my soul. Like, this feels true. There's one power and one presence. The truth of who I am is infinite. You know, these ideas that were definitely not being taught at the Episcopal Church.
Yeah. Yeah. It was freedom for us when we heard that. Yeah. And not only freedom, but when I first heard that I'm one with God, and that everything is okay with me, it was an unbelievable release for me. And I'm sure it was that way for so many people when they first heard those words at Unity. So praise God for Unity.
Yeah. Well, and I know your one focus of your show is diversity. And obviously as a gay boy growing up in the Episcopal Church, I feel very, very fortunate because my first gay role models were older men who sang in the choir who were very kind and loving. We had an openly gay priest growing up. And, you know, if I think back, that was Indiana in the 1970s. It's kind of remarkable, really, that was my experience. And then, you know, I have the opportunity of meeting people who, you know, unfortunately did not have that experience, that were taught there's something fundamentally wrong with you because you're gay and you're going to hell. I know people who went to conversion therapy. So there are so many layers that I didn't experience, and I'm really grateful. And at the same time, what I love about Unity and other New Thought traditions is it can be such a place of healing for people who grew up with those messages, to have a new experience of what we call God, or a new experience of spirit.
So true. You know, when we first hear that we're okay and that God loves us no matter what, it's very enlightening. At least it was for me. So enjoy that. Let's talk a little bit about, you went from Unity to, as I said in your bio introduction, to Agape. Tell us a little bit about that switch. And I know that I visited your church in Oakland a couple of times when you were there. Yeah. And it was a very sweet community there as well. But tell us a little bit about your transition to Agape. And I know you have a wonderful relationship with Michael as well. A lot of people probably love to hear about that. But tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know which version you want, but Michael Beckwith has a term that I love, and that is the pain pushes until the vision pulls. And I like to be fully transparent. So when I had the calling to go into ministry, I absolutely decided that I was the heir apparent to Unity San Francisco and that I was going to be the senior minister there. And let's just say the universe had different plans. And it was a painful time in my life, and it was a transformative time in my life. And I look back now and I have a great awareness or an understanding of what we call chemicalization. And if someone's not familiar with that term, it simply means our consciousness is raised to a higher level than we are currently operating. And when I had the calling to go into ministry, I went to our then minister, Reverend Maureen Bass, and I said, Maureen, I have kept this for a year. without telling you, but I've had the calling to go into ministry. And she said, "Oh dear, are you sure you're ready for that? Just fasten your seatbelt, darling," with her Southern accent. And that was the experience for me, because what had happened at that time of my life, and I won't go too deep into the details, but I had kind of forgotten the truth. And when I say forgotten the truth, I had really built a lot of my life in a very egoic way. And full transparency, I was using Unity principles to manifest more stuff, right? I had this successful business. I had the house on the hill in San Francisco. I had this thing of wanting to look good again. And when I had the calling to go into ministry, I had an awareness that a deepening would be required. And I even had an awareness of some of the way I was living my life was probably not going to be congruent with my new awareness of how I wanted to be in the world. And so there was some difficulties there. I was ultimately, I was president of the board at Unity San Francisco for a long time. Then I became ministerial associate. When I went back to ministerial school, I attached. That was going to be what I wanted. I wanted to be senior minister, and it just didn't work out that way. And so through discernment and through trusting vision and through some painful experiences, I started an independent New Thought Center in 2012 that was called Awakened Living. And we did that for 4 years until Michael Beckwith reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to be the first satellite of Agape, which is obviously a massive honor, and so much congruency in consciousness with Michael and his teachings. Of course, it was a yes. So we affiliated with Agape. I became ordained through Agape during that time. And for the next 3 years, then I was the senior minister of Agape Bay Area.
It was a beautiful crowd of people there. I remember them. And I remember Allison.
It's so interesting. I had a 30-minute phone conversation with her this morning.
Oh my goodness. Tell her I said hi when you speak to her again. But so tell us a little bit about, I know you did talk about your past, and you did some drugs and things of that nature, and were addicted to certain things. Tell us a little bit about why you're so passionate about addiction and recovery now. And I know that when we go through things, just like with the deaths of my mom and sister and dad, it catapulted me into the ministry. It changed my life. So I know that those things happen, but give us sort of a scenario of that, if you would.
Yeah. Well, around the same time, I went back to school. I went to school at Unity Institute, and that was a 5-year process. I believe it was like from 2005 to 2010. Around that same time, in 2008, I started working in the addiction treatment field. And at that point, I was a little over 20 years sober. And I promised myself I would never work in treatment. That was not my path. And again, my idea was that I was going to be senior minister of a community, and that was my path. And, I thought I knew that was it. And when I started working in the addiction treatment field, I fell in love. I fell in love with the transformation that could happen. And I realized something that was so powerful, Brock, for me. And that was, I walked into a situation where people were at the most desperate moment of their life. And what I discovered is they were so hungry for transformation, even if they weren't aware of their own hunger for that. And I saw the clinical approach being one that was very diagnostic. What are your symptoms? What is your diagnosis? And how do we treat? And I came in the midst of being at Unity Institute, in the midst of this transformation, in the midst of my life kind of falling apart, and me realizing there was a much deeper awareness and a deeper approach to living life. And I came in asking the question, what if our clients aren't broken? What gets created when we look at them as their diagnosis or look at them as broken in some way? And so I came in asking the question, how do we help them or hold a space for them to remember their own divinity? And honestly, Brock, not many people were saying that in the recovery world back then. This was 2008 and 2009. And now it's definitely become more mainstream. And I'm sure we'll talk about, what transpired from that moment. But I just fell in love with the work, and I fell in love with being a voice for, simply said, bringing new thought principles into the addiction recovery space.
What a wonderful thing that is, TJ. I'm so proud of you. And so glad that you're doing that and bringing that service into the world, because I know that I went to a couple therapists back in my 20s and even in my 40s, and I didn't go into any kind of treatment or a recovery type program or anything like that. Mine wasn't about that, but it was, all of the treatment was so clinical.
Yeah.
And it seemed so foreign to me. And I knew even at that point that it really needed to come from within me.
Yeah.
And from within and out. And but I didn't understand how that all worked at that point. I know that what you're doing is groundbreaking. I don't know of any other out there, not that I look it all up or anything, but I have not heard of anyone that's bringing the new thought principles, the Christ Jesus principles, into the recovery program. So kudos to you for doing that.
Thank
And
you.
what a blessing.
Yeah, thank you, Brock. I really feel passionate. I think the clinical work is important. I'm thinking of a Buddhist proverb or an Indian proverb that says we're a house with 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, and that it's important for us to spend time in each of those rooms. And I think so many, like you said, when I went to therapy too, like I had a therapist and she was wonderful, and I was able to see patterns in my life and understand, the traumatic events that led to why I was the way I was, but I didn't really know how to actually transform those things. I had an intellectual understanding, and not all therapy, but some therapy lives in the mind, which can take us really far. But then there's the spiritual piece. And when I say spiritual, I mean reconnecting with our true nature, knowing that we're a spark of divinity. That's not something that's always explored in recovery circles. So when I started conscious recovery in 2017, 18, it became my life's work to bring this message, and more than a message, an experience for someone to recognize or recognize their own true nature.
So how do the people that are attending process or think about, or what do they say when they hear the new thought principles that you're talking more about within and spiritualness versus pills or therapy or something? How do they respond to all that? Do they know about that, or is this all brand new to them?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, one of the things that I realized when my book came out, which was 2017, a lot of therapists would read it and say, oh my gosh, this is really what I do. I really do behold the perfection in my clients, but that's not really what's taught in school, right? And so there's amazing schools that are doing this work, like CIIS in San Francisco, and there's one here, Santa Monica College, where they really are doing depth psychology and spiritual psychology. So what's happening right now, and what I love, I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine who are very much science-based, and I come in the spiritual guy, and we're coming to the same conclusion. And that conclusion is, if we disempower people through looking at them as broken and telling them that there's something wrong with them and they need to somehow fix themselves, we're not getting the same effect as, what if you have the power within you to heal? And recovery is about what needs to be unlearned and dismantled so that you can return to your true nature. It's a very exciting time, I think, to be alive. And I'm so grateful I'm a part of this shift in awareness within our field.
Peter's got a question, I believe. Peter, you want to speak up?
Hi. Yeah, TJ, I find this fascinating. If, as I understand it, the predominant model for recovery in America is 12-step. And my understanding of 12-step is that there is a religious component. There's, you're helpless, you've got to give yourself over to God. I know that in more modern thought, they say, well, God can be however you perceive it to be. But the original 12 steps reference God several times.
Yeah.
And unity, as you guys have been talking in New Thought, is the divine exists within us. It's not externalized. How does your work mesh or not mesh as well with the 12-step models?
I love your question. And I'll start with talking about the brilliance of 12-step and how, talk about groundbreaking. This is in 1935, these guys came up with something from the Oxford movement, which was kind of part of the Episcopal Church, interestingly enough, that was something profound, because at the time, the model was you're morally deficient people, right? People were being locked away in insane asylums. That's what they called them then, because of their addiction. So for them to come along and say, you're not a deficient person, you have a disease, that was groundbreaking. And so the idea that we surrender to a God up there and out there also was something that was really very innovative and new at the time, because people were trying to heal addiction with no spirit at all. So I start with that by saying, yay, 12 steps, saving millions of lives over the years. I come along with conscious recovery, and I'm always very careful to say, my intention for conscious recovery isn't to become an alternative or a support group. It's an additional resource for treatment programs, for people in recovery. And honestly, when the book came out, before I developed the whole system of care for treatment programs, the number one group of people who were reaching out to me and saying, oh my gosh, thank you, were people in 12-step recovery, 2 years sober. I just kept hearing it over and over and over again.
Wow.
And it's because they had gone really far with 12-step, but they knew that there was something more spiritually for them to connect with. And they also knew there was something deeper to heal within themselves. Because with conscious recovery, I'm very curious about how we heal the underlying root causes of the addiction, not just treat the symptom.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome. I'll let you two continue now.
Thank you. Well, and just another thing with that, it's like, I think in some ways the concepts in conscious recovery might seem really counter to 12-step. And in other ways, they're very congruent, right? So like the idea of there's something wrong with me and I need to surrender. My version of that in conscious recovery is much more of a new thought approach. And that is, when I have separated from my true nature, right? Okay. When I separate from my true nature, I believe I'm broken, and then I act broken in the world, right? There's a focus on character.
Okay, see, now that rings the bell for me.
Yes.
I know some people in 12-step programs, and especially early on in their recovery. A very dear friend of mine is years and years and years, and he is not like this now, but so much self-defining based on what he was seeing in 12-step. And I understand it was very supportive for him to stop drinking. But it was, wow, you're really defining yourself externally now. And that was uncomfortable to see, because I do like these principles where we can envision and manifest our destiny. But of course, that's like a varsity level skill to be able to do that. And so I'm sure there's steps, no pun intended, before the embracing one's own divinity and using that, being empowered by it.
Exactly. And I love what you're saying, because that was me. When I discovered recovery and I went to 12-step meetings, I thought it was the one and only answer, and I was proselytizing. It was the one and only answer. Right. And I bought everything that I heard in every meeting. And then as I stayed around a while, then I found unity. And then I started to realize that, as Brock said, with 12-step, it's identifying your own sense of a higher power. And that began to change rapidly for me, and it started to expand. And there's room for that within 12-step. That's what I love about it. And just like any movement, there's going to be people that are kind of maybe rigid about it. There's people like that at Unity, right? There's people like that in every, and so I was that person. So I have a lot of compassion for that. And it's a process, right? Because I think I had to heal some of my shame in order for me to understand that I was even worthy of imagining that I might be a spark of divinity.
Yeah, Brene Brown has been transformational for me, her work on shame. And I think that gay men were just raised to be ashamed, to live in a state of shame. And
that's right.
And when that's programmed in so early, it's really hard to shake that.
Yeah. With conscious recovery, I identify the 3 root causes of addiction as unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And when I think about gay men, or anyone in the alphabet, if you will, anyone in the community, I know it's changing, but for any of us of a certain age, we have all three of them. It's almost an automatic, right? Even though I didn't grow up in a church that was telling me there's something fundamentally wrong with you, I did hear that at school. I did get called the F word on a daily basis, right? So like, I didn't not absorb the shame of just being who I am. So I agree completely. Healing that is so important for us.
Well, I think that whole notion of when we're separated from our true self, when we're not in touch and embracing our true self, we move through the world as though we are damaged, and damaged people create more damage, sort of.
That's right.
But anyway, I'm hijacking Brock's show.
I mean, I don't know if Brock's okay with this, but I love this. But
no, it's all good.
One of the things when because 100% correct, damaged people, hurt people, hurt people. The great news, and the three of us know this, and I'm guessing people watching now also know this, the great news is healed people heal people. And I have played both roles. I'm not going to be here to tell you that like I discovered unity and it was this beautiful path toward enlightenment. That was, I went through some really dark times. During my recovery, I forgot who I was, and I was acting out of, as my friend Temple Hay says, my woundology, and I was causing harm in the world again, right? So it really is not about this idea of becoming good. It's this idea of becoming more and more who we truly are. And I had this profoundly simple idea, and that is, when we know the truth of who we are not causing harm in the world. We are being love in the world.
It's true. It's true. And let's take what you just said, we are being love in the world, not causing harm, because right now, let's take that into our process, into our hearts as we go into a break. Peter, we need to take a break for a few minutes. We're 30 minutes in, and everybody stay tuned. Run to the bathroom really quick if you need to, get something to drink, and we'll be back in 3 minutes.
All right, here on the New Thought Media Network.
Yes, sir. New Thought Media. And we're back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back, TJ. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Peter.
Thank
So
you,
we
Brock.
left. You're welcome. When we left, we were talking about conscious recovery. So that was actually my next question to get into. So we've talked a little bit about it, but let's get into it a little bit deeper. And then also, and we've only got about 20 minutes left, y'all. So there's a lot. I have this much more I want to talk about. So at any rate, conscious recovery and your other two books, or however many there are, tell us a little bit, give us some insight into that. I know how this came about, and you sort of talked about that, but talk about those three books a little bit.
Yeah.
Those are your mainstay.
Yeah. I mean, conscious recovery, I'll focus on that since you're asking that. When I started working in the field, as I said, in 2008 or 2009, I discovered there was such a strong focus on treating symptoms and behaviors instead of really getting down to the actual root causes that drive addiction. And with heartbreaking, I guess, clarity, I was seeing people come back to treatment 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, even more times. And we were still doing this kind of one approach, right? Which was a very clinical diagnostic approach. And I realized through working with some very phenomenal clinicians that there is a place for all of it, and that there's not one answer to addiction and recovery. And when we come together and offer different pieces to the puzzle, if you will, we can create truly integrated treatment. And a lot of treatment programs say we're holistic and integrated, but what does that mean, right? And so I really realized at some point that my calling now, for however much longer, is to bring this message of conscious recovery, to add the spiritual piece to the addiction process, the recovery process with addiction and with mental health concerns. So it started as curriculum that I was facilitating at a treatment program in Sausalito, and I was getting these phenomenal results. And it was really, Brock, like what you and I had been doing in New Thought for so long. And I knew that when people truly experienced their own divinity, their own true nature, there was a shift that can happen that's so much more powerful than anything that happens in the mind. Then I wrote the book, Conscious Recovery, in 2017, and then a series of workbooks. And now I've developed curriculum. What I do mostly with conscious recovery is I travel now around the world. I'm leaving for London tomorrow to go do a training at a program. But it really is about creating a space for clinicians to understand what gets created when we view our clients as broken, and what could get or does get created when we look at them as having the inherent ability to heal themselves, and we're here to actually guide them and help them. So that's become my life's passion now.
But you know, what came to mind just then was that you are supporting the supporters.
Yes.
You know, the people that are in the work. And that's what Martha Creek does. You know, she says that she is there to support the ministers doing the work. So what a wonderful thing, TJ.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, each year I create a theme for myself, and this year's theme is Healing the Healers. Conscious Recovery has an annual conference every year, and it's coming up in 2 weeks in Orange County. And the theme for this conference this year is Healing the Healers, the Emergence of Authenticity. So I bring together people in our field that are having this deeper conversation about exactly what you just said. People are feeling really burnt out working in the field. And for me, I discovered something that is profoundly simple. And that is, if I think my clients are broken and it's my job to fix them, it's exhausting. And it's also not very effective. So the whole conference is based on how we can start to view ourselves and our clients differently.
Well, I get chills just hearing you say that. Would you, I saw a quote. I'm going to read this quote really quick about you. And it stated, TJ is changing the conversation about addiction and mental health because he recognizes that underneath all maladaptive behavior is an essential self that is whole and perfect. Will you help me personally understand the maladaptive part and what you mean by that?
Yeah. So if it's true, and it's true for me for sure, that we come into the world as a whole and perfect spiritual being, and if that doesn't work for someone who's watching or listening, let's say we come in as a blank canvas, and then we absorb the world. We absorb the conditions of the world, the messages that we hear. Parents, like my parents were in a loveless marriage. I absorbed that. I developed what I call core false beliefs about myself, and those become the operating system. And we know in New Thought that becomes an energy or a frequency, right? So no
Mhm.
matter how hard I try, I keep finding myself in relationships that are confirming I'm not lovable or I'm not good enough. And so most of the treatment focuses on the symptoms, the relationship issues, the addiction, the mental health diagnosis. And with conscious recovery, we ask what's in the unconscious or the subconscious that is actually running the show. And then we develop what some might call coping mechanisms. I call them brilliant strategies. In clinical terms, we call them maladaptive behaviors. And all that means is I discover something that brings me relief, and then it works until it doesn't. And then it's not actually working, but I'm continuing to do it. So that can be an addiction, that can be a behavior, that can be over shopping, that can be, a porn addiction. It can be a lot of different things. And so with conscious recovery, I say underneath all of that, there is an essential self that's whole and perfect. And the journey of recovering is really reclaiming that truth. And then pretty much questioning and unlearning just about everything that has stood in the way of me knowing that.
Thank you for that. And now I understand what maladaptive means. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that really is sort of the secret to conscious living, isn't it? What you just said. I mean, what would you call the secret to conscious living? I mean, what is the path?
Well, I think when we think about consciousness or conscious, because my books are Conscious Being, Conscious Recovery, and Conscious Creation. So obviously there's a couple different ways to talk about it, right? And, in New Thought, we talk about relative and ultimate reality. And that's the same with consciousness, right? There's collective consciousness. In other words, the ideas and beliefs that we collectively agree upon, and that's different culturally based on race or age or ethnicity or socioeconomic status. But we get taught things that become our operating system, if you will, or the way we see the world. And that's relative consciousness. What affects that is, as I was saying before, what gets trapped in the unconscious. And I love what Carl Jung said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. And so what's living in the unconscious? If you plant a maple seed, you will get a maple tree. And so if I plant an I'm not lovable seed, I'm going to see it everywhere, right? Where I'm projecting that onto everything. And really, it's not about trimming the branches or putting some pretty lights on the tree. It's about getting down to that root. The analogy continues to work. Getting down to the root. It's not even cutting the tree down. It's where did this seed develop? How do I start to heal that seed and ultimately return to that place that is pure consciousness, which is God, source, essence, beingness, whatever word we use to describe the place within us that is unharmed and unharmable.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone watching this now and watching this later, we have a lot of people that look back at these over the week. I hope that they hear this particular part. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Brock.
So would you be willing to read a passage from one of your books?
It's interesting. You asked me that, obviously, when we were in the green room and I'd opened to a page. And what's interesting, Brock? It's what we were just talking about. And that, I literally just opened it to a page. So I'm going to read from my book, Conscious Creation, which is my newest book. And conscious creation is this 5-step process to create in the life of our dreams that I created. And one step in this, or one piece in it, is the O. It's a 5-step process movie, MOVIE. We can talk about that later if we have time. But the O is overcoming core false beliefs. So it's very interesting. That's what I opened to. Unconscious patterns. Thought does have power. You can change your thoughts and thereby alter reality up to a point. But thought is not alone in this reality changing process. Thought and action are often fueled by emotion, and emotion is associated with something deeper. The unconscious filters that color our worldview, the structural elements of our reality that I'm calling core false beliefs. Core false beliefs are certain types of belief that are grounded not in fact, but in emotion and memory. Core false beliefs are ideas about ourselves. Let me say that again. Core false beliefs are ideas about yourself that are held deep in the unconscious. Deeper than thought, they are your primary filters, and they have become embedded in your body and even in your energy field. These beliefs are what have produced and written, cast, directed, and filmed the old movie you're now trying to transform. And unless you acknowledge that producer, become aware of it, and start to evaluate the way it works, you won't be able to write a new script, much less put it into production. Unless you get down to these beliefs and bring them into conscious awareness, these unconscious beliefs will be in charge, not you. And isn't it interesting that that's exactly what we were just talking about?
It was. It's all divine order, right?
Absolutely.
And that was very powerful, what you just spoke about. And I wrote down primary filters. I want to remember those two words. Thank you for that. Thank you. And do you have that book with you right now that you just read?
I do.
Hold it up so they could see there we go.
If you can see, it's Conscious Creation. It's a movie projector, because the idea of the book is that we're projecting onto a blank screen or a blank canvas and calling it reality. And when we're using those primary filters, whether that's, I had this very interesting thing in my 20s. I had a core false belief that I was unlovable, but I also had a core belief that people were going to like me. So I walked around in the world with everyone liking me, but I just couldn't connect to someone actually loving me. So that's what we're talking about. That's the projector. And as our friend Byron Katie says, we walk around with a piece of lint on that lens, and we see it everywhere, and we think it's happening in the world, but it's really about clearing that lens. As a matter of fact, I opened this book with that paragraph from her book, Loving What Is, because her work has been so transformational in my life.
It has for me too.
I want to chime in here for a second. I went to your website, TJ, and I think there's three of your books there: Conscious Recovery, Conscious Creation, and Conscious Being. I want to make sure people see that. I'm definitely interested in reading these. And I wanted to chime in. Are you familiar? It was written maybe 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3. A book called What Happened to You. It's a collaboration of Oprah Winfrey's, actually. And let me find the other author.
If it's who I'm thinking of, it's very interesting. I was just reading her post about it yesterday.
Bruce Perry is the other. Yeah. Because that I'm fascinated, and just like I'm sure everyone who's watching and who you've spoken to, it's really can be an excavation process to really get down to those messages we learned, that it's the seed under the soil that's growing. We don't even know. And I found, I've not read the entire book, but I found a lot of passages in that book and a lot of the explanation about how we are programmed from a very early age. And the author, Perry, talks a lot about how as children, as babies, as newborns, we are sponges. We absorb everything because that's our job, we're new in the world. We got to figure it out. And how, unfortunately, we're not always exposed to positive, reinforcing, loving messages and things like that. And so I suggest it to people who are fascinated by what you're saying right there. And if they want to even go further and learn some stuff about it, it's a very informative resource.
It sounds like there's a lot of congruency there. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. There's two things that are coming to mind as you're speaking. One is, if we look at brain development as a very small child, our brains aren't even developed. So we don't have the cognitive ability to understand what's happening. We are purely absorbing energy. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes when I say 80 to 90% of the way we communicate is through energy, if anyone has pushback on that, we go to the brain science of it, right? Yeah. Because that's why we know that trauma that happens in the first 5 years of life can often be more significant than later traumas, because we absorb. Like a very small child who is sexually abused, for example, believes it's their fault somehow. or that
Sure.
they did something wrong, that they are wrong. And it's because our minds at certain developmental stages are, if mommy's mad, I'm bad. If daddy is absent, I'm unlovable. It
Yeah.
doesn't need to make cognitive sense. And I come alive with this conversation, because what happens is so many of the approaches or the ways we try to frame it is we try to change our relationship with these core false beliefs through the mind, but they
Right.
didn't originate in the mind. They originated in the body, in the psyche, in the spirit. And what I add to the entire conversation that you just said is, yes, and in addition to that, there's a place that's unharmed and unharmable. There's a spiritual essence about you. And when we connect with that, and we didn't really ever disconnect, but when we develop a relationship with that part of ourselves, that makes the healing of all of this so much different than if we believe we are our trauma. And so that's why, I could talk for a whole hour on trauma healing, but a lot of times we think people aren't ready to heal the trauma because they think it's about going back and re-experiencing the trauma, but they also believe that they're fundamentally broken because of the trauma. And I'm saying, what if that's not the whole story?
Yeah, right. No, I think that's fantastic. I think that, and my recollection of what I read in this particular book is it does take some of the more clinical sort of look at it, and that element that you're speaking about is just such an important part of making that leap from I'm damaged to, oh no, I was exposed to damaging thoughts, but I'm still resilient.
Yeah. And that's where
Exactly.
we could say a part of me feels damaged. A part of me feels wounded. We don't want to pretend like that's not true. I mean, Brock, you and I have been around long enough to know that we can do a spiritual bypass where we just say, oh, that didn't hurt me. I'm whole and perfect and everything's great. God is who I am. Yeah, but you were traumatized. So there's still these wounds that might need tending to. I'm not saying they absolutely need tending to, but when we anchor into spirit as a starting point, I think that the ability to actually work through those and walk through those is dramatically greater than to someone who doesn't have a relationship with that spiritual essence. And that's really my work. It's really blending these two. It's not this or that, it's this and that.
This and that. Thank you for that as well. Yeah. We've got about 6 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
I know, it's already gone so fast. TJ, well, first off, will you come back in a couple of months and let's go deeper? Because here's what I want to talk about if you say yes.
Yeah.
Is the trauma healing. Let's get into the trauma healing next time.
Let's do it.
Spend an hour on that. But I'll call you and we'll set up another date in a couple of months. But what if you were just out in the world at a bus stop or waiting on your Uber to come in LA or something? What would you just say to someone that said they were hurting and needed some kind of support? What's one sentence that you would say to someone that you maybe didn't even know to help uplift them?
Well, I'm gonna actually, of course, I'm not gonna exactly, and I'm gonna say there's two things I'll say. I'm gonna first start with this. No matter what has happened to you, no matter what you have done in the world, there is a place within you that is whole and perfect and that is unharmed and unharmable. And you deserve a life filled with love, joy, and connection. You came into the world as a precious, beautiful being, and that's still who you are. And your journey now is a journey of remembering that. That's one piece. And then the second piece is a more practical piece, and that is find a community who supports that. That has been life-changing for me. It's very popular to say, find a like-minded community. I don't even know if you need a like-minded community. I think it's more about a community of people dedicated to knowing that truth. I have friends who have very different points of view about any political issue. Just name one. We would probably find a way to disagree. And at the heart of it, we know that who we are is infinite beings. And when we find a community of people dedicated to seeing that and knowing that, that might be a unity community. It might be a Centers for Spiritual Living. It might be a 12-step meeting. It might be a support group. We're not sure exactly where we're going to find it, but that has been the most transformational in my life.
That is so true. And thank you for those words. And I would say that last part to someone as well. at any time is find a network of people, find some people. And I can say that truly, meeting Martha changed my life completely.
Yeah.
But Affiliated New Thought Network, that group of people, I know they love me. There's no doubt. And I know that they respect me and that they like me. And they're glad that I'm part of the board. But what I get from that is people who see me. Because a lot of people don't see us when we're just walking down the street. They don't know us, or they can't feel our energy, or maybe they can. But when you find that tribe, that soul tribe that you came into this world with, and you're reconnected, it is the most amazing friendship. That's of right. knowing for each other that we are what you said, whole and perfect. Right. And born this way.
That's
so
right.
Thank you for that. And I hope that everyone has a community like that. And if not, call us and we'll help you find one.
Yeah.
But Unity certainly changed my life as well, finding that community. So thank you for that. Absolutely. And TJ, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you in a few minutes. I would love to stay for another hour. But
Me too.
At any rate, but we will come back another time. And I wanted to remind everyone that's watching now and that watches it in the future that TJ is available for guest speaking and workshops. I believe he said it a little bit earlier, but you can check it out on his website, all of his information on his website, which is tjwoodward.com, TJWOODWARD.com. And so check out his website. There's a plethora of information, and join him sometimes if you're in the area where he's going to be speaking. It'll be a remarkable experience. TJ, thank you so much. I love you. Peter, thank you. So I guess we come to the end of our show. So TJ, I'm grateful for your participation and sharing such interesting, thoughtful, and helpful information. Thank you to all of our viewers and subscribers, and to Peter, our producer, and a shout out to Robert Brzezinski, the founder of New Thought Media Network, and for allowing me to have this show on here. And join us next week when we meet with founder of Urban Angels San Francisco, Nelson Berry, a really dear good friend of mine.
Yeah.
He's the one that got me into working with the unhoused and things of that nature. So I'm looking forward to having him. So y'all come back and meet Nelson next week, and make sure to check out all the other great shows on New Thought Media Network at ntmedia.org. Good night. Come back next week for Spiritual Toolkit. And don't forget to check out ntmedia.org on New Thought Media Network. Thank you so much, TJ. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Brock. Love you.
Love you too. And blessings to everyone.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.